So my name is Benton. We're here to talk about rapid data modeling and testing. I am a Couchbase community champion. As you actually met some of the other speakers around here, Brant and Dave Starling, both presented yesterday. The Couchbase Community Champions and Experts programs is a fantastic program that gives you, access to the dev teams, gives you early access to builds, access to other champions and experts within the Couchbase community. Laura Tchaikovsky is actually the head of that program, so if you're interested in more learning about that, get with Laura. I work as an applications architect for Market America and Shop.com. I primarily work with the mobile apps team and our front-end UI team. We are big Couchbase users. We've been using Couchbase now for about 3 years in Sync Gateway. And we chose Couchbase for a variety of reasons, including scale and performance, flexible data model. Same reasons most of you have chosen Couchbase or are evaluating Couchbase today. But by choosing Couchbase, this introduced a whole other set of issues that we needed to, and challenges that we needed to deal with. In particular, those issues was data. Right? We're now changing how we think about data, how we represent data, and how we structure our data, going from a relational schema to a non-relational schema. And so no matter what your workflow is, or what your project lifecycle is, whether you're dealing with Agile or Waterfall or Wagile or something in between, right, data still needs to be a consideration. But we all know that this is actually the true project lifecycle. Enthusiasm, disillusionment, panic, search for the guilty, punishment of the innocent, and praise for the non-participants. Anyway, John Johnson said, first solve the problem and then write the code. Right? Data is a problem that needs to be solved just like anybody else. So who's doing data modeling now in Couchbase? If you're not doing data modeling now, you should be doing data modeling for sure. There's actually 3 phases. I'm just going to slide over these real quick. There's actually a great presentation later today by Clarence and Tyler on data modeling. But we have the 3 different phases. So we have conceptual, logical, and physical data modeling. In the conceptual phase, all we're doing is representing entities and relationships. We're not talking about user IDs and data types and things like that. We're simply defining the entities of our domain and how they relate. We can represent these entities using a variety of notations like Chen or crow's foot or Bachman, etc. My personal preference is to use crow's foot. I think that's what a lot of people use. After conceptual data modeling, you move on to logical data modeling. Now we've added in attributes of our entities, right? A user has a user ID and a first name and a last name. Or an order has an order ID and has line items. So we want to associate all of these things together, and that's what we define in our logical data model. So regardless of what database we're using, we've gone through conceptual data modeling, we've gone through logical data modeling. And in a physical data model, in a relational system, it's real easy. There's a lot of tools out there, a lot of WYSIWYG editors that you can drag and drop and define your data fields and the data types and what those relationships look like. But with NoSQL, how do you represent your data model? Right, what tools are available for you to do your data modeling? How do you show relationships within your data model? Does your code define and document your data model and represent it? Right? There's a lot of questions that we came up with and we had to answer about how we wanted to represent our physical models in NoSQL. And when we first started out, we actually started out with just JSON. Right? We defined some dummy JSON documents to say this is what we think the data is going to look like, and we can easily see a structure. But there's really no context here as to what fields mean what descriptions. There's no rules or anything like that that's being described here. And so we moved on to looking at JSON schema. Has anybody ever here played with JSON schema at all? Use JSON schema? Yeah, good. JSON schema is great. We can define not only the properties and the data types, but it actually becomes very verbose when you get really complicated models and trying to associate all that data and properties together and describe them. So we moved on to YAML. YAML, yet another markup language, but this provided us a more concise way to describe and define our JSON data models, right? And we actually store these models, these YAML models, files, as part of our projects. And so they're committed to the Git repository just like the code and everything else alongside them. They're easy there for the developers to access, right? So now what do? I've told you, hey, let's go use our YAML models. Your project manager is going to say, hey, let's start development right now. We got to get it done and get the project out the door. But we have an issue, which is we actually need data to work with, right? We need to build this big, gigantic project, and here we are in the middle. We don't have any data to work with. And so oftentimes as developers, we'll write code to build throwaway code, to generate a bunch of fake data for us, and then that's useless code that's thrown away, not used anymore. Or we might do something like this and actually go in and manually create a document in Couchbase just so we can test something, right? And this is a very time-consuming process, right? This is sped up. This took about 60 seconds. Well, if I'm going to go in and just create, if I have 4 different models, that's 4 minutes of my time that I've spent trying to just go mock up some data so I can go retrieve it from my application and actually start development. That's not a very good use of your time as a developer. There's actually a lot of good data generators out there. Faker.js and Chance.js are both NPM projects. JSON Generator, Mockaroo, JSON Schema.net. All these can generate random data for you based on a variety of different rules. But they all have one fundamental problem, which is relationships are hard. Right? They only deal with a single model at a time. We need to be able to have data integrity across multiple models. So let's take a domain like e-commerce, for example. Right? You have users and orders and products and reviews. Well, especially when you're generating fake data, your orders need to be tied to valid users, and your products need to be tied to orders, so we maintain that data integrity and we can actually work within our application. It doesn't do me much good to just generate random order data, random user data, random product data. Right? I need all of those to be able to be tied to each other. So we came up with Fake.it. Right? Fake.it is a CLI tool that's inspired by Swagger. We define our models in YAML. This can generate JSON, CSON, CSVs. We can export data to Couchbase, to Sync Gateway, to a zip archive, or just output it to a console that then you can pipe to some other process if you want. It exposes actually both Faker.js and Chance.js. You can use your own custom build functions. There's pre and post build hooks in there for you. You can define multiple models at a time. These models can have dependencies, so we can actually figure out the dependency order for you. And we also have definitions. So if you've ever used definitions in Swagger, you can define a phone number and then use that same definition just by reference multiple times. It is important to note, though, that what we're doing here with Fake.it is more for getting up and running with development and establishing structure. So you might use Fake.it to just be able to start retrieving data, or you want to test out some NoSQL query, or if I was having problems with a NoSQL query over a million records, a million documents, and I knew Brant was an expert in NoSQL, I could say, hey Brant, here's what my model looks like, and send him a simple YAML file without actually providing him my real data, and he would be able to duplicate that in a test environment and actually start trying to assist me with my NoSQL query. CB workload gen is more for sizing of your cluster and configuration of your cluster. Right? With CB workload gen, you can generate massive amounts of random data, randomly sized data to appropriately size your cluster. To actually get Fake.it, it is an NPM project. So if you have Node running on your machine in NPM install Fake.it -G. This will actually go through, install Fake.it for you. It'll install it globally, and you'll be able to use it directly from the command line. So what did we do? We took our original YAML file that I said we went to start documenting our models, and we simply added a data attribute to this model. Right? You can see here we have things like post build, or a static value, or just a build function that are in here. And that is describing to Fake.it, okay, when I generate a JSON document for this, generate it this way. And so if we were to do that from the console, this is actually what that looks like. I can say I want to generate 1 of this model, or 2 of this model, or 3 of this model. And it's outputting all of that data directly to the console, which is the default. But each one of those in each run is actually randomized, truly randomized data. I'm not saying we have, my name is John Smith, and I'm at 123 Test Street, my phone number is 11111111, that all of us tend to do when we're having to mock up and deal with fake data on our own. I get a truly randomized data set in this case, which is not only good for my application developers, it's also good for my UI developers, right? So they're able to see and visualize multiple different sizes of data and a variety of data in this case. We can actually take this same model again and generate it as a physical file, right? So in this case, I'm going to generate multiple JSON documents, 5 different JSON documents, and output them to an output directory. And now I could go do whatever I wanted to do with those, right? You could use actually a tool that came out with Couchbase Server 4.6, CB import, and just import your JSON documents directly. So you could generate random data and then share that random data with somebody. It gives you a lot of flexible options. There's multiple different output formats. So JSON obviously is the default output format. If for whatever reason you wanted to output CSON or actually output YAML, you could do that. And we'll take a look here and see exactly what that looks like. So again, same model, I'm just outputting it differently. We haven't changed anything with the model. We've been using the same model this whole time, but I've been able to send it to multiple different destinations and formats. Even if you are a relational user still, right? There's still several people that have relational systems and are running it side by side with Couchbase or other database systems. We can take this same model again, and I'm going to generate 20 records this time and actually output it to a CSV file that then could be imported into this relational system to have a good test data set to be able to work with. And even with 4.6, you do have, that's in developer preview now, CB import can import CSV files as well. We can take all of these same documents and generating physical files that we've been dealing with and actually stream them into a zip archive, right? So I can generate 100 different JSON documents and say, okay, put it in this zip archive for me. And then I could use a tool like CB Doc Loader to load it directly into Couchbase, or I could take that zip file and share it with another developer, share it with my QA team, whatever I wanted to do, I would be able to have all of that randomized data available and be able to share. But what about Couchbase, right? I wouldn't be standing up here talking about generating fake data if I didn't allow it to put data directly into Couchbase and stream data into Couchbase. So again, with the default to be able to stream data directly into Couchbase, I'm just specifying a destination of Couchbase in this case. The default server is going to be your local host, and the default bucket is going to be default. So if we take a look at this, again, same model, we haven't changed anything. I just generated 1,000 documents and threw them into Couchbase in less than a second. That's really advantageous and powerful to developers, no matter if you're a developer, you're building views or nickel queries, MapReduce functions, etc. You now have a really good test data set to actually start working with that's randomized data, and you haven't spent a lot of time generating it. You simply defined a single model. But what about mobile? And mobile is actually our initial use case, where we wanted to, we didn't want to keep writing code to generate fake data and then make a bunch of HTTP calls and go through Sync Gateway and everything else, right? So we added Sync Gateway support to fake it. Again, this is simply just another destination where I say Sync Gateway. I tell it the number that I want to generate, and I give it a server URL that's pointing to my Sync Gateway, and along with the bucket that I want it to go into. And this first example here, we're interacting with Sync Gateway without any authentication. Guest access is enabled, more or less. So we're able to come in here and we refresh, and we see that we just added actually 100 documents directly into Sync Gateway. This is what's really powerful, especially for mobile developers. And we can do the same thing here for Sync Gateway with authentication. You simply pass it a username and password. It will go to Sync Gateway behind the scenes, actually authenticate that person, and then use that session information for all the subsequent calls when it's adding it into Sync Gateway. So you can see here, we actually created a Sync Gateway user. That user is here now, and it's CB Connect 16. Password's obviously the most secure password is password. And we're going to say fake it. Again, the same model. We're generating 50 this time. I'm pointing it to my Sync Gateway server. I'll pass it the username and password. And it will actually go through and perform all of these requests, populating the Couchbase through Sync Gateway, which will now be available on my mobile device as soon as I authenticated that user and started syncing. Right? Very powerful for mobile applications and Sync Gateway, and being able to truly get a randomized data set for your developers. So how does it work? Right? We said we added a new data property basically to our YAML definition. There's multiple different functions in here. So there's a pre-build, build, post-build. We have value. So if you have a static value, one of our best practices with NoSQL is to use a type or doc type on every single document that you're writing. Well, that's simply a static value, right? We don't need to do anything with that. And we actually then have also pre-run and post-run functions that if we're going to generate 100 documents, before we generate 100 documents, we'll call a function for you. And after we're done generating 100 documents, we'll call a function for you. So that looks something like this, where each one of these, you're basically defining a function body in JavaScript, and we're wrapping it in a function, and these variables are what's accessible to it. Right? So this scope is the current document being generated. You have a documents variable, which is any documents that have already been generated are actually available to you. And this is how you can go and create your relationships. There's a globals variable that you can hook onto. There's chance.js and faker.js that you have hooks to, and the document index. Right? A lot of times we want to be able to generate a document in order. Right? So think user ID. I want to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in order. That's what document index is going to be able to provide you and return those values. So if we looked at a flow of how this would work, model pre-run gets executed, then we call the model pre-build function, then we actually go through each of the properties and initialize them to a string or to a number or to an array or an object, whatever it may be. Then we'll go through and we call the pre-build and build functions for that given property. So once the entire model has been generated, then we'll go back through each one of those properties and we'll call a post-build function. Right? So I think a lot of times when this is advantageous is, let's say you have a user ID. You need to generate that user ID before you could actually set the ID of the document or the key to the document. So the key to your document might be user underscore whatever that generated ID value is. Right? And so that's what we're able to do here. But if we were to take a look in this case at how it might run, we've defined a simple model that is calling each one of these functions, pre-run, post-run, build, etc. And we can generate this model. We'll say we want to generate 2 of them in this case, but all they're doing actually is just logging output into the console. And now you'll be able to see in the console a tree of actually how all of these are executed and what the actual order is in. But up to this point in time, all I've shown you is a single model. Right? There's a lot of tools out there to do single models. Well, in this case, I have users and products model side by side here. And I want to be able to generate both of these at the same time. Now, in this case, they don't actually have dependencies or anything like that on each other. But we can go through here and simply say, OK, all the models in this given directory, let's generate 20 of each of those. And we'll actually get a nice output. So now I'm starting to get more and more data that's generated for me and available. But more often than not, we have dependencies, right? We have users depends on products, and reviews is going to depend on users and products. And our orders are going to depend on our users and our products. And so we want to be able to generate all of these. You can start to get really complicated with your dependencies. So what do? We simply define in our models that there is a dependency in this case, orders depends on products and users, and the same thing here for reviews. It's depending on products and users. So we go in and we say, okay, we have all of these models to generate. Let's figure out what our run order is. And now once we've established that run order, we can go in and generate all of this data in order. So in this particular example, we're going to generate about 16,000 different documents between orders and products and reviews, and we're going to stream it directly into Couchbase. And now I'm going to have a really good data set to start working with. And we can see that I've generated a user now. And when I go back, I can actually bring up that same order document and look up that user by the ID. That's actually going to be a document that's now in Couchbase. I can go back to the order and we can look at all the randomized data that had been built with that, grab a product ID, which in this case, we decided to use a UID to represent that product ID. And I can go look up that product, and that is actually a valid product, a document that was created for me. So now with my dependencies, I've been able to create relationships on the fly as a developer in a matter of seconds. So if you're using something like Docker, for example, you can bring up a Couchbase container, throw a bunch of fake data at it, do whatever you need to do, and throw it away. And you're not worried about saving that data because you know that you've defined your model and you have a consistent way to recreate that model with randomized data every single time. Right? Really valuable. One of the last things that we added was definitions. Right? This is something that's part of Swagger. Has anybody in here worked with Swagger at all? Yes? Good, good. So with Swagger, you're able to create a definition. So on the right-hand side, we have definitions of a phone number and an address, right? So in this case, we have a phone. And phone is going to be referenced here as a home phone and then a work phone number. And our address, conversely, we're going to have a home address and then a work address that we're referencing. So I can define, this is how I want you to create a phone number. This is how I want you to create an address. Now I can repeat that if my model was built that way, right? So running this particular model is just like anything else. All the definitions are processed before we actually start generating the model. They're all copied over. And when we go in to build it, you can see that we're getting our home address and work address are structured exactly the same, but it's different data. Our phone numbers, again, are the same way. We have generated a phone number. In this case, we're pretty lenient on the structure of what our phone number looks like. We just know that this is how we wanted to generate a phone number. It might be an extension, might be some formatting, not formatting. In a production system, you probably want to just strip out all those characters so you can format it however you want. But again, we're just wanting to get up and running with fake data and be able to start doing development and not actually worried about the data that we're generating. More often than not, we're not all lucky enough to start with greenfield applications though, right? As nice as that would be, when you go into a project and you're like, man, I wish I could just scrap this whole thing and start over from scratch. That's not always feasible, right? We need to be able to deal with existing data. And so we've provided a couple different mechanisms with Fakeit that you can go in and actually provide it input at the time you are at runtime, when you're generating all of your fake data. So we have, in this case, a continent's JSON file and a country's CSV file. And we're going through here and we're saying at runtime in my pre-run, if there's not a country's file passed in or a continent's file, I actually want to throw an error. Now, when I get down here to the country, I'm simply saying grab a random array element from the existing data that I know is valid. This might be from another system. This could be user IDs from another system. For us, for example, we're not doing anything with authentication around users in Couchbase. That's a completely separate system. But I need those user IDs to be a part of the documents that I'm creating. So once that person is authenticated, I can start syncing documents down to the mobile device. Right? So we actually provide an input of a JSON file that is some test users when we start generating random data. So I know I can successfully authenticate somebody, and I can be able to pull in all this related data for them. And if we were to go in and try to generate this model, we're actually going to get an error because we haven't provided it any input. Right? That was kind of a restriction then when we built this model. Hey, throw an error if they don't pass in any input at all, or the country's input doesn't actually exist. And so the countries and the continents that we're seeing here are actually from the input file that we created. So if that input file ever changed and we regenerated a bunch of data, we would see that reflected in our generated models. So for us, how do we use Fake-It? I think I said this earlier. We take our models that we generate. There's about, I think, 10 or 11 of them. We generate those, and they're basically just inside of our Git repository. They're committed to just like anything else, very small files. This allows our developers to have control of what their models are doing. Right? So if we have a new addition or a new feature that's being developed on and they need to change the model, well, they can actually go just regenerate all of their models, and now it's affected in their application. If whatever they're doing is no longer being worked on, or they would need to change something, again, they simply throw away the containers, bring them back up, change their models, and now they're able to regenerate all of their data on the fly. So this puts a lot of control in the developer's hands to be able to do this. And the other part too is I'm lazy and I got tired of writing throwaway code and sitting there spending time generating all of it. But so we give our developers, our app developers who are mostly hybrid, they get a Docker Compose file that has 3 containers in it. There's an Nginx container to serve as the web server. There's a Couchbase container and a Sync Gateway container. And we've gone in here and scripted all of these to go in and create the buckets on the fly, or automatically once the Couchbase container starts up, we'll go in and create a few different buckets that we need. Then Sync Gateway container will start up, and it will actually make the connections that it needs, create the documents in the buckets that it's looking for, and all that will be up and running, within a few seconds using Docker Compose. Now, once this is up and running, we've kind of wrapped Fake-It around make commands, or bash, whatever you want to do, to pre-script it for them. So literally all they're having to do is type make fake data, and it goes through and knows what the address is for their Couchbase container, what the address is for the Sync Gateway container, all the calls to make, what inputs to provide, and now they really don't have to think about it at all. So they're not concerned with data. They want to build their application, they want to get it working. And if they did need to change the model, that's something that we would talk about, update their model. They'd go in, regenerate the data, and now they've been able to have a good test bed of data within their applications. The next thing that we're looking at using this for, we haven't got there yet, is as part of our build process. So when we're creating releases and we're going to our QA and testing team to be able to say, okay, here's a build of iOS and here's a build of Android, now go in and create a bunch of test data and actually start testing the application, not only from the unit tests that are there, but using the UI tests through Appium or Selenium or whatever tools that would be available to start generating that data and have randomized data be part of the test cycle. And you could do the same thing through, let's say you were writing unit tests using Mocha and Chai or whatever in Node, right? You can simply make Fake-It a dependency of those projects and actually generate random data that's then being passed to your unit tests, right? There's a lot of different use cases for this. So I don't know if I'll have time to go through all of these, but we'll give it a shot. There's a separate GitHub repository out here that's Fake-It examples that basically has provided a lot of YAML files for you as the developers to go in and play with, right? And it's showing things like definitions or multi-model dependencies or just generating truly flat data. there's a music data set in there that is very similar. If you've gone through any of the Couchbase trainings, they use a music data set that you can be able to generate this vast amounts of data with. There's some other simple ones just to get started with. The social one is great from a standpoint of it creates a lot of highly complex relationships to be able to go through and say, okay, I have friends and who's their friends and things like that. And the social data set actually has a lot of really good NQL examples. If you're wanting to start learning NQL and look at some more complex queries than just the basic ones that are out there and available for people to use, you can go in here and create the social data set, or you can actually take it one step further and create your own data set and start using NQL queries. The flight data one is probably my actual favorite data set. It will create about 250,000 docs over 17 different models. This is things like airports and runways and users and airport reviews and airport navigational aids. And there's a lot of other NQL queries in there. There's even some haversign queries that will say, what's the nearest airport, or what airports are within 100 miles of a given airport. You can actually do all those things in NQL just like you could do in a relational system, be performing complex haversign queries. And this is something that I wanted to evaluate and see if there was any use cases for it. So I simply created a test data set to be able to do that with. So we have about 10 minutes or so left. I want to leave it open to some questions, and then we'll go from there. Maybe we'll do some demos or something like that if anybody has questions. Yes, he's going to bring you a mic just 1 second.
When you're generating random data, can you specify a seed so you can actually reproduce the same data set?
Yes, yes. And so as part of when before we start generating a model, you have a pre-run. So you could say, I want to start my user counter at 100, for example. So you can seed that however you want. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes?
So are you planning to add the visualizations?
Could you repeat the question?
Questions. Are you planning to add visualizations to your model that you are capturing using whatever notations, and so that to make it easier for non-developers? I'm more specific, referring to the people that are interested in look at the model at the enterprise level,
yeah,
but not necessarily for individual testing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't really thought about adding the visualizations to it. We have thought about taking from a model standpoint where you're specifying dependencies on a model basis, going more to the property level where you could say, on the orders model, you have a user ID, and being able to say that user ID property is related to, and give it an actual path to a user's model to then be able to resolve that dependency. So we would look up those dependencies, and that would actually allow us to be more performant from a memory management standpoint. Instead of, if I knew that users was only being related by the user ID, but my user document was 2K, and I generated 1,000 of those, I would actually be able to go through and strip out all that other information from that user's model and just simply keep the ID, because I knew that only this field was the one being referenced. And that would allow me to be a lot more efficient. This is not, like I said earlier, it's not a load testing tool. It's more of a structure tool and being able to generate that. So a few 100,000 documents is a great test data set for developers to be able to just get up and running with. Right?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
I know you said it's not for load testing, but just out of curiosity, have you tried it with like 1 million documents plus?
I don't think I've tried it. The most I've tried throwing at it is a few 100,000. What Dean Proctor has done, who I think is Title Solutions Architect, something along those lines, from Couchbase, is he will actually spin up multiple instances of like NPM and then use bash scripts on each one of those to, what this gentleman over here was saying, to seed the documents and basically have all of those start throwing data at Couchbase. So he's using it for sometimes with structure, but the more nodes that he spins up, the more clients that he has connected to it. And so he is simulating some type of load. It's all in how you use it. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Good question. Any other questions? Okay, well, I can come in here real quick and actually see if we can do some live demos, if I can find my mouse. So I should have a Couchbase server that's sitting here running locally. This is just a Docker container. Let's do administrator, password. I have a default bucket in this case that doesn't have anything in it. I'll open up terminal. So what we're looking at here basically is the GitHub repository that has fake it in there. So this first case, let's do, I don't know, which one do you guys want to see? Pick one.
Flight data.
Which one?
Flight data.
Flight data. Of course you'd pick flight data. So
Go take it home.
what's that?
Go take it home.
Yeah. So, all right. What we'll do here is we'll just go into flight data. And if we look at what this looks like now, I have there's a models directory in there that we're going to deal with. Here's some input files. So I actually am passing in valid airlines and frequencies and navigational aids and routes and runways. And then I'm transforming all of that data as we go through here. So, and then each of our models, we have multiple, you can see here we have like airline reviews and airlines and navigational aids. And it's actually really interesting with this particular model, this one here, which is called codes. Codes is, every airline has an IATA and an ICO code, right? So that's your or think FAA code. And sometimes this could be 3 letters or 4 letters. And then every airport also has that same IATA or ICO code. And so when I was building this and I wanted to go say, how can I look up these airlines? I said, oh, well, do I actually need NCL to be able to go look up all of these IDs? Or can I just go create documents that have these codes? So at the time I generate these models, and we can take a look at the flight data set for airlines. After the model has been generated, we actually push the result into this globals variable called codes. And we do the same thing for airports. We're pushing that result into codes. And then the codes model actually is not generated off of any input. It's generated off of a global variable. So I'm saying to generate however many global.codes, how big that array is. So now I'm able to use data and generate data to then actually generate more data later on as I put a dependency in here to say codes depends on airlines and airports being created. So if we were to run this models, put his input, and let's just do 5 for right now and output it to the console. You can see here we got a bunch of random data. So in this case, here's my airport codes. I have generated some airport reviews, airport titles. Let's keep going up here and see. We have navigational aids. So in this case, there wasn't actually any nav aids for these airports. We have our actual airlines. So in this case, airlines in this model were keyed by a number and not the actual IATA or ICO code that we were associating with. But if I was to look up one of those codes that we saw down below, right, I see that there's an ID here. So now I could go look up airport _ 56 and actually be able to get to that code. And this same codes pattern will work for airports and for airlines. So let's go over here to Couchbase real quick, and we'll create a bucket, call it flight data, give it some memory, flush it, and we'll let that create. And just for time's sake, we'll say we'll generate 1,000 of these. Couchbase server is 120.1. Bucket is flight data. Actually, let's do it with verbose so you guys can see what's going on here. Oh. It's because there's actually not 1,000 continents. Let's just let it run the whole thing. I don't know if this little container can take it, but we're going to find out. So what this is doing here is going through and generating each of the models, and after each model runs, it ends up getting flushed to the destination. So if we were to look here in Couchbase, you can see that this number is going to sit here and grow more and more and more. And if we wanted to even have some more fun, I could say, okay, let's do our e-commerce model. So I'll open up a new tab here, and we'll go over to e-commerce, CD, oops, project, examples, e-commerce, and models, Couchbase. And we'll just throw that into the default bucket. So we'll just start throwing let's do a verbose again. So if you do the verbose argument, it actually is going to print to the console like how many of the documents that it's generating for you. So if we came back over here, we're going to see that our default bucket is starting to get a bunch of data in there. Our flight data set is still getting a bunch of data thrown into it. We could go in here and actually inspect that. I don't think the codes have probably been generated by now, but might be able to do like, yeah, codes haven't been generated yet. But we can actually come in here and inspect and say, okay, here's what my airport looks like. I can page through, there's probably too many to sit here and get through. Let's try airline 100. No, that's not an ID yet. So we can see that basically as we are developing, we're able to generate vast amounts of data very quickly to have good data sets to work with and get up and running with our applications. That's probably about all the time that I have for today. If you have any questions or suggestions for this Fake It tool, open up an issue on GitHub. Pull requests are welcome. Any ideas you have, there's my email, my Twitter, and my GitHub. So I appreciate it. Thank you again for your time. Thank you, Couchbase, for putting on some wonderful conference. And that's it.